When people hear a strong opinion from someone famous, wealthy, or respected, something subtle happens in their thinking. They stop questioning, not because they are unintelligent, but because trust feels efficient. It feels safe. Critical thinking begins when we resist that shortcut. Today, we are going to analyze not one, but two famous arguments against Bitcoin, both made by Warren Buffett. Not to attack him, not to defend Bitcoin, but to learn how to tell the difference between strong reasoning and persuasive language. Welcome to Critical Thinking Lab. Before we touch Bitcoin, we need to clearly define what critical thinking actually is. In simple terms, critical thinking means slowing down and asking three questions. What is being claimed? What assumptions are being made? And does the conclusion logically follow? Without this process, people tend to follow the crowd. And history shows us that the crowd is often confident and often wrong. So let's slow this down together. Argument 1. Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. This is one of Warren Buffett's most well-known criticisms of Bitcoin. At first glance, this argument feels serious and analytical. So our first critical thinking step is to clearly restate the claim. The claim is that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value and therefore should not be considered a legitimate asset. Now we ask the next question. Why does this argument feel convincing? It feels convincing because Warren Buffett's investing philosophy is built around productive assets. Companies produce goods. Businesses earn profits. Real estate generates rent. From this framework, value comes from cash flow. Bitcoin does not produce cash flow. Inside this framework, the conclusion feels logical. But here is a critical thinking rule many people never learn. An argument can be internally logical and still be wrong if the framework itself does not fit the subject. Bitcoin is not a company. It is not a stock. It is not a business. Bitcoin is a decentralized monetary network. Judging a monetary network by business valuation rules is a category error. A category error happens when you evaluate something using standards that belong to an entirely different category. Let's slow this down with an analogy. Imagine saying, a calculator has no value because it doesn't grow food. That statement might be true, but it's irrelevant. Growing food was never the calculator's purpose. The same mistake happens here. Now consider gold. Gold produces no income. Gold generates no cash flow. Gold pays no dividends. Yet for thousands of years, people have trusted it as a store of value. Why? Because value does not only come from productivity, it can also come from scarcity, durability, and trust. This reveals a hidden assumption. The assumption is that the only legitimate form of value is cash flow. That assumption is never proven. It is simply assumed. Once we identify the assumption, the argument becomes conditional, not absolute. We've just analyzed why arguments fail when people outsource thinking. That same principle applies to how we store and verify value. Quick note before we continue. When we talk about critical thinking and responsibility, that doesn't just apply to ideas, it also applies to the tools we use. Personally, when I'm moving Bitcoin off an exchange, I want as little ambiguity as possible. That's why I personally use Trezor. One thing I appreciate about Trezor is how clearly transaction details are displayed. Instead of one long, hard-to-read string, addresses are broken into readable chunks, which makes it much easier to verify what you're signing. I also like that Trezor offers a Bitcoin-only device. From a security and peace of mind perspective, Reducing unnecessary complexity matters. I've also noticed that transfers from exchanges to my Trezor Bitcoin wallet tend to settle faster than with some other wallets I've used, which makes the whole process feel less stressful. And as a professional user experience designer, I genuinely appreciate how clean and intuitive the Trezor Suite interface is. The details matter, especially when you're dealing with something that carries real responsibility. At the time of recording, this channel is not sponsored. These are simply tools I personally use and trust. Now back to our video. Argument 2. Bitcoin is rat poison. This is another famous quote attributed to Warren Buffett. And immediately, we should notice something important. This is not an analytical claim. It is not an economic argument. It is a metaphor. Critical thinking requires us to pause whenever language becomes emotionally charged. Metaphors are powerful, but they are not evidence. Calling something rat poison does not explain why it is harmful. It only triggers an emotional reaction. From a critical thinking perspective, this is an appeal to emotion. The argument bypasses reasoning and goes straight for fear and disgust. Let's slow this down. What does rat poison actually mean in this context? It implies that Bitcoin is dangerous, deceptive, and destructive. But none of that is demonstrated. The metaphor replaces analysis. This is a common reasoning error. Instead of explaining mechanisms, risks, or evidence, a speaker uses vivid language to guide how you feel. Here's a simple analogy. If someone says, "That idea is cancer," they are not explaining the idea. They are labeling it to shut down discussion. That doesn't make the idea correct or incorrect. It only makes the listener emotional. Critical thinking teaches us to separate language from logic. Strong arguments rely on clear premises and evidence, not metaphors. Now, let's be fair. Buffett may believe Bitcoin is dangerous, but critical thinking requires that danger be explained, not implied. Without reasoning, Bitcoin is rat poison tells us more about emotional framing than about truth. Putting both arguments together, this is where the lesson becomes powerful. The first argument tries to sound analytical, but relies on a mismatched framework. The second argument abandons analysis altogether and relies on emotional language. Neither argument on its own forces us to accept the conclusion. That doesn't mean Bitcoin is good. It means the reasoning used here is insufficient. Critical thinking does not tell you what to believe. It teaches you when belief is not yet justified. Big takeaway. When you hear claims, especially from powerful or respected people, slow down and ask, is this an argument or just a metaphor? What assumptions are being made? And does the conclusion actually follow? If the reasoning doesn't hold, you are not obligated to believe it. Looking ahead. In the next video, we'll analyze a claim that caused a lot of concern in the core Bitcoin community. Michael Saylor claimed that taking self-custody of Bitcoin is unnecessary and only done by the paranoid. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. This video is for educational purposes only. Nothing here is financial advice. This content is meant to teach critical thinking skills, not to recommend any investment. Always verify information independently and do your own research. This is the mission of Thinking Lab. We help people learn how to apply real critical thinking to Bitcoin, to media narratives, and to everyday life decisions where reasoning often breaks down. If this video helped you think more clearly, like the video and subscribe. We release new videos weekly. Think clearly. And we'll see you in the next lab.